Hey, this is Mark back again with another episode of Finding Your Summit. And this week we have Maura Sweeney on the podcast. And she has a whole mantra in life called living happy inside out. And the long and short of her story is she was living somebody else's life, not hers. She grew up on the East Coast in New Jersey, and she was always groomed to become a lawyer. She went to Boston College, went on to law school, was well on her way towards becoming that, but completely empty, completely just at a loss for what she wanted to do in life. It was not purposeful for her, and she was miserable. So we talk about how she got unstuck and went on and what she does today, which is go all over the world. She's been in more than 60 countries and involved in speaking to women's group and other people about empowerment, about breaking out, about doing things that you were meant to do, and again, living happy inside out. So great episode, and as always, please go rate, review, talk to your friends, pass it along. We love it, okay? So let's talk tomorrow. Here we go. Hey, everybody, it's me, Mark Pattison, back again with another great episode of Finding Your Summit. And this week we have Maura Sweeney, and she comes all the way from Clearwater, Florida, and I'm broadcasting, as always, from Hermosa Beach. So from coast to coast, ocean to ocean, here we are. Maura, how are you doing?
I am great, Mark, and thanks so much for having me on today.
I'm really excited. And the reason why I'm excited about this is because today we're talking about really trying to achieve happiness and contentment and purpose in those things. And you've got this great tagline called living happy inside out, right? And
I do.
I know. So how did you come across that? And we're going to get into your background and where you grew up in New Jersey and what made you feel stuck and then got you unstuck. But just in general, at a 30,000 foot level, where does that come from?
It comes from a lifetime of belief and executing it on a regular basis. And the whole idea behind it is this. Will you allow an outside world or outside circumstances that you either don't agree with or that works against who you really are dictate to you? Or will you instead, from the inside, choose to be happy, choose to be free, and choose to live an authentic life? Because if you go with the first mode of thinking, you will always be a victim and you will always live that out. But if you choose instead from within to be happy, to be authentic, to be your real self and to find ways to express yourself, then you will find yourself as a beneficiary in a benevolent universe. Yeah, sounds high-minded, but I've lived it.
Well, I think it's also easy to say and hard to do from this standpoint. I think circumstance sometimes dictate that you're in a job that you get paid a certain amount, maybe really well, but you hate it. I've got a number of buddies who are in this situation because you've got kids going into college, you've got a wife to support, in some cases, the mortgage and all these other responsibilities you have, right? And so to flip that around and say, you know what, I know that there are outside pressures, but I just want to abandon that and go in my own direction and do what I feel like I was meant to do. Is it takes a game plan. It takes a lot of, I think, gumption. I think it takes a lot of courage, right, to go do that. But at the end of the day, you have to go find that path, right? Otherwise, you're going to sink.
Agreed. And you know what? I'm so glad you're giving the caveats to that, because what I do today as a speaker, a podcaster, a writer has been in the making for over half a century. So it's not like I just decided to pop out of a box one day and say, let me tell you how you could be happy and live an authentic life. Mine has been incremental. And you're right. Every time we make a decision, there's always going to be a certain number of consequences, whether it means we have to give up something maybe that we thought was our financial stability, or sometimes we might give up a peer group of people. Sometimes we might give up all those things we were always told were important. There's always a trade-off. But the bottom line is, it's something I've been doing for a long time, and it does take courage. I think people hear I talk about happiness and they're waiting for fairy dust. It takes a lot of courage, and it takes a willingness to step out and be yourself. Sometimes when it's not an easy thing to do, and sometimes when the outcomes, at least at the outset, do not make you feel happy, but instead maybe make you feel very challenged as a result.
I totally appreciate what you're saying. People who watch listen to this podcast and know my story from the background of being out there and going through a very difficult time when I was separating from my now ex-wife. And I wasn't living in my place where I was living in Seattle. I'd moved down to California, very lonely. And it was just like, how do I get out of this? And how do I get to a better ground? And so it's not always about career, right? It's many times just about purpose and happiness and being joyful and surrounding yourself with positive influences. And all those things just I had reached my rock bottom. And so for me, gravitating towards the mountains and really finding that joy there and getting the clarity to really execute a plan going forth. And so I'm blown away at where I'm at today compared to where I was 5-6 years ago.
One thing we haven't even talked about is our identity. You're right. It's not always about the stuff that's out there, but it's the way in which we view ourselves internally. And sometimes by going through some of those shocks, we do have to say, wait a minute, is this really who I am? Is this the highest version of myself? How can I be more of myself? And I agree with you.
Yeah,
There's
absolutely.
a lot into it.
There is a lot to it. So let's go back to where you grew up, New Jersey, right?
New Jersey.
Yeah. So
Looking at New York City.
Yeah. So I want to get to the point of how you lived your life as a little girl and going into a teenager and into college. And I think you were put on a path that other people thought you were meant to be on, but it wasn't necessarily the path that you wanted to be there.
Very true. What's interesting, and this is again why I probably use everything to my advantage. Grew up in northern New Jersey, right outside of New York City. When people ask where I live, I say right near Giant Stadium, which at the time was the Meadowlands. And I have to say this was actually a good thing. My family expected me to grow up to become a lawyer, which sounds wonderful. So for that reason, I was always moved toward academics and toward achievement. Sounds very good, but it also...
Why was that?
Why was what? Why was I groomed to be a lawyer?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things that people really, with my kid, I've got 2 daughters, right? One's 19 and the other one's 21. They're in college now. And my whole thing for all time has been be the best you can be. Whatever you choose, go at it 100%. But it's your choice, and I will support you 100%. Right? So in your situation, how is that different?
Well, I would have to agree. We have a daughter, and I've brought her up the same way. Go follow what you love, and you'll go far with it, and you'll be happy and free. In my case, who passed away when I was 5.5, and he was a very accomplished Georgetown educated attorney. He passed away, and everybody decided after that, well, Maura's going to be a lawyer just like her grandfather. So I went to Boston College, majored in political science. And after that, I took out loans and started going to law school. And all during that time, while I enjoyed studying, that would not have been a path I would have chosen. For me, I kept imagining being in a career that required a tremendous amount of passion in a state that I didn't want to live in because I was more drawn toward warm weather. I was more creative. I needed to be an advocate for everyone rather than just one client, let's say to the detriment of someone else's client. And halfway through that time period, I literally became like the Walking Dead. If you ever go to my website and look up about Maura and see a photograph of me, it was New Year's Day, 1982, and I was midway between law school studies, right at the midway point. And I think that's when it hit me because it was like going down a path that had no end. It was going to be a 40-year trek of staying in New Jersey, which is generally what you would do. And back then, if you went to law school and didn't practice law, you were considered a flunky. Maybe they didn't pass the bar. So it was no going back. And I thought, can I make it for 40 years living in a state I don't want to live in, practicing in a career that does not speak to me, only to be old enough in my 60s to retire and say, I'm moving to Florida. And one day, Mark, with all of the effort I was putting in, I literally could not get up out of my chair to get to class. I was recently married. My husband came home from work and he said to me, I was sitting in the same chair. He said to me, oh, you're not at school? And I opened up my mouth and nothing came out. I was that at the end of my rope. And I will tell you what I attributed it to. Fear, the need to always gain approval of other people, specifically in my case. And I was just a people pleaser. And my body could no longer get there. And it was very frightening.
So you cut out just for a second. And I wanted to go back to what you were saying. So where did this pressure come from?
Oh, mine came from my family.
And when you say your family, your mom, your dad, or just one person, the whole thing?
Parents. My grandfather, the attorney, was already passed. My grandmother had passed when I was younger as well. So I would say, yes, my mother and father fully expected that. That was the plan.
So when you talk about fear, right? Mm-hmm. What were you fearful of?
Everything. First of all, I had never really gotten any of the approval I was ever seeking. So I was one of those kids that was always the overachiever. No matter what you put in front of me, I would just try to work hard and do well at it. I would have done that probably anyway, but I was doing it for the wrong reasons rather than the right. And I really had not been prepared for anything else. So here I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I've never gotten the approval I was hoping to get from my parents. And now I'll never get it. We had just recently married, had a mother-in-law who did not really want to see me marry her son. I wasn't from the same ethnic group, and she just figured that anybody that wanted to marry her son was going to take advantage of him, and I had no intention of doing that. I always planned on taking care of myself, so it was, I would say, a lot of family, social expectations, and I thought, oh my gosh, what do I do now? Because I was always on a path, and it was literally that whole thing, where do I go? I knew what I didn't want to do, Mark, but I had no idea of what I did want to do. That was a frightening thing. There was only one thing that kept me going. I knew that whatever it was as I was growing up, and I had decided this when I was a really young child, I spent a lot of time feeling very much like I had no freedom of my own. But I did make a pact with myself that I was going to grow up happy and free. And to me, that meant living an authentic life.
But you weren't doing that.
Well, exactly. I wasn't. Here I was at 23, and I'm doing everything I'm told, right? So I leave law school. But this is the one thing I knew. I knew what I didn't want to do, which was go to law school and practice law. But the big thing for me is I knew that in my lifetime, I wanted to be able to get out of bed in the morning, put my feet on the ground, and get going, doing something I felt so strongly about, so passionate about, and so energized about. And law school, and I don't mean to say it law school for others. It was just for me. Law school was not that path. It was disempowering. It was taking away all of my energy, and I literally became a walking dead person. I needed the opposite, and I needed to find my way there. And so I thought, well, I'm just going to go paving paths.
So I saw that picture from 1982.
Yeah.
You're right. You do look, well, first of all, love the do, the 80s do. So
80s.
Yeah, it was great. But the other part of that is I could tell from that look, you didn't look joyful, right? And so much of what you're talking about is I'm going down the wrong path. I'm feeling this family pressure. I'm stuck. I don't even know how do I get unstuck, right? So let's talk about that. So now you go through this transition period, right? Where you're midway through law school and now you're going back to kind of that childhood thing, which is you want to live a life of purpose and you're not doing that, but breaking out of something that you're already on this certain lane, right? This track that you're on to become this corporate lawyer, whatever you're going to be. And you know that this is the wrong path, right? And what's going to happen when I announce to the family that you're feeling all this pressure coming from, hey, this is not for me. I'm leaving law school and I'm going to set sail in a whole new direction. And I don't know what that direction is yet. So tell me what that transition period was like for you.
Okay. You sound a lot more confident than I did back in 1982. The one thing was for sure, I was the one taking out the loans. For one thing, one could say to me, you better pay us back or we put all this money out on your behalf. So that was one good thing. Secondly, I took a friend with me and I said, mind coming with me to the registrar's office? I need to tell these people I'm taking a leave of absence. I don't have the nerve to tell everybody I'm going away forever. But I knew in my heart when I dropped in my leave of absence papers, I was never going back. And even after I moved to Florida, I reapplied, got accepted, and I thought, this is so not me. So I took it as a leave of absence and I was going to do some other things. And I had already been working part-time as an executive recruiter, which meant that I was able to call people all over the country in every different industry, learn about what they were doing, interview people, present people to client companies. And I love the interaction. I loved learning. I loved building people. I loved presenting people. And so that was actually a help. I got my real estate license, but never went to practice. So I just kept going out there doing different things. And I'll tell you this, in the early 80s, after working full-time then at that recruiter firm, I lost my job. I was working with my husband. The economy went south. We were both out of work. And my husband got an opportunity to move to Florida. And I thought, hallelujah, 2 lost jobs, 1 new opportunity in Florida. I'm out of New Jersey. So it's funny how things happen, right?
That was the escape plan, right? It's
Yes.
great. So now you're dipping your toe in this other field, executive recruiting, right? And you're still up in Jersey, right? Doing that. And you know that's not where you want to be. Sounds like your husband was on the same track too. And now you guys gets the job, this new job down in Florida. And so off you go. So there's like no barriers held back. I'm going for it. We're moving down there. You're happy, right? Just from a lot of
You
times.
can hear my voice.
Yeah. I mean, hey, look at a lot of times.
Florida's a happy place.
Florida can be a happy place. Yeah. Except that there's hurricanes blowing through, right?
Right.
But the bottom line is now you land there. At what point did you start to zero in on your career path about empowering others, happiness, life fulfilled, purpose, all those things?
Mark, when I told you I had to wait until I was in my 50s to do what I do today, it's because I took a very long path. And maybe it was because of the era I came out of. But I will tell you this. I was offered one job in Florida. There were hardly any jobs. Down here was retired at the time. I got one job offer in the telecom industry, which was burgeoning at the time. It was one of the largest telecom companies in the country. They were competing with AT&T when AT&T had the breakup.
And how old were you at this time?
25.
Okay.
Yeah, 25. And I thought, oh my gosh, I don't want to do telemarketing sales and I can't stand this industry, but it was the one and only job I got. I have to tell you this funny story. After 6 weeks of going everywhere with my resume, responding to everything and nothing coming in, I literally had gotten down on the floor one day and I said, dear God, my husband and I are buying a house. I need to pay a mortgage. I need to know where I'm going to get a job. And would you believe at that very moment, the phone rang and it was the guy, the manager at the telecom company said to me, Maura, have you made your mind up? And I thought, well, I guess God's calling. I'm going to say yes. Here I am in a place. It's the only option I have. But Mark, I'll tell you something. I started out thinking, oh, what am I doing here? Am I good enough in sales? I don't want to ever push anything on anybody. 3.5 months later, the manager was promoted to the home office in Chicago and left me as the manager. And I got promoted several times thereafter, which meant that I had to overcome 10 other people, 11 other people in the office that all wanted my job. And I didn't even want it. The manager said to me, Maura, you're either taking it or I'm firing you. So I had to overcome that whole idea of everybody else thinking they were better than me, more accomplished than me. And I had to learn how to create a positive working environment. I had to create a winning culture. I had to do so much with nothing because every day felt like I may lose my job today. And yet I'll tell you, within a year and a half, we had the top branch office in the nation at one of the top national telecom companies. And to answer your question, this is the environment, which was a very struggling one for me, where I discovered my passions, my talents, my loves, and everything about me that could hire and train the best people, find all their talents, promote them, make them experts, promote them multiple times into other positions, and do exceptional things in terms of creating a culture where everyone could do well. And I loved it. So I did that for about a decade.
So,
and I did other things since then. But
yeah. So you said
pivotal.
something interesting to me, which was that you're now working in this job, right? And you felt like now as a manager in other positions, as you're working your way and every day, if you didn't do X amount of things, you felt like you were going to get fired, right? So do you think that tied back to when you were a kid, right? And you're seeking approval from your parents, right? I mean, did that...
You're an intuitive man. You know, that's an interesting thought. I will tell you this funny thing. In my office, I never put up photographs. You know, people move into their office and they just move in. It looks like their hangout place. Even when I left 9 years later at the second company I was with, I had a gift. It was a frame, picture frame from one of my managers. I never even put my photograph in there. It was the husband and wife that came with the photograph. And you know why I thought? It's that I understood corporate America, and you're only as good as you are recently. But that's a very intuitive thought. Everybody else extensions to what they were doing. I wonder if part of it was that, yeah, if somebody could drop me in an instant. But I will tell you, even though that might have been my backdrop, everything within me was always focused on the better model. So that put me through about a decade of really rubber meeting the road, where people that I was working for maybe wanted me to fire people sooner or mistreat people or use a kind of management technique that would be so totally against my belief systems, because I'm one who empowers. So I was constantly, for that time period, expressing everything I do. and yet getting and delivering all the results the corporate. It's a very tough line to go through, but I'm telling you, 25 years later, after I'm gone from that organization or those organizations, I've got people I hired, trained, developed, promoted that are still friends today. And they have learned so much and they're better for it.
Yeah, I think there's this whole notion about the overachiever, right? And I think by being the overachiever and always feeling like you're not quite there and you're taking more swings at bat, you're trying to get over the hump and you learn things along the way from humility, from adversity, from people that didn't treat you right, that were superior to the way the organization was set up. And so I think you hold on to those things versus the entitlement, the other part of it, of people who are given everything, right? And they just don't understand about adversity and they never had to really work for those different things, right?
Very good. Yeah, I figured you'd have a very in-depth interview here that we could go on for hours. Yes. But I also want to tell you something else. I did have a point where I changed companies and I was brought into a new organization. It was the first time ever I had a terrible manager. And I remember one day, and this kind of goes into how do we live a happy life, an authentic life? After I had already given notice to the previous company I had been with for 5 years and was moving in to launch a new market for this other international corporation, I realized the manager that hired me was not right. And I could remember feeling like I was in such an ethical dilemma because this person already knew what my mindset was like as a leader and expected me to perform differently. And I remember thinking, what, you could take this job and shove it? But I wasn't in a position financially to do that. So I made sure, and I would say every move along my life where I was pressed caused me to say, am I going to cave or how can I use this situation to grow from it? And I think because of that, I made a series of decisions that would put me in a position where I wasn't always so exposed and that I could have that freedom to walk away or to adjust when I needed to.
That's interesting. Okay, so the name of this podcast is called Finding Your Summit. And I believe that throughout your life, there's not just one summit. Okay, so I look back on my life and there's these, I almost look at them by decade. So between my 20s, I was trying to play football, right? In my 30s, I got married and had kids and started businesses. And so bottom line is that you talked about, it wasn't till you were in your 50s that the light went off on how can I take all these nuggets that I've learned over these years and place them into trying to help and empower others. And same thing happened to me. I'm in my 50s too, right? And here I am. And I would have never understood this at the time, but these podcasts that I'm doing and talking with others in my own life, my own journey, all these little things, playing in the NFL, climbing mountains, starting businesses, talking to people, having experience, having kids, all these things have led up to what I'm supposed to be doing today. And it's amazing that because we all want things now and we want them to happen, but sometimes it's just not the path of the journey that you were supposed to be on at that time. And so I finally went off on okay, Mark, just slow down. It's all good. Things will happen the way they're meant and supposed to happen in due time. And that's a great spot. So, okay. So for you then, now we're in our 50s, right? And how many years ago did the light go off? Now you're taking all these gifts that you've been experienced over all these years, and now you want to apply them to the world, help others, right? In this whole, again, I want to look at it, living happy inside out.
Yes, it is in my 50s that I did this. But I will tell you, when I was in my 30s, I took a certain number of promotions, but I also did not take other promotions. I left what I was doing in my 30s when I've had our only child and I homeschooled her and I helped my husband build a business. I've traveled to 60 countries. Let me just tell you this, Mark. I knew as a preschooler, watching airplanes fly back and forth to Newark Airport, I wanted to travel the world and make new friends. And even though my grandfather was an attorney and a prominent one, I used to sit in his office, but I was more taken up with the typewriter that his secretary used, who was busy coming up with ideas that would be put in duplicate and triplicate and people would read. I knew as a preschooler what I wanted to do was travel the world and share good ideas and meet new friends. So in all these decades that I was going through, whether it meant leaving law school, going into business, but knowing at a certain point, this is enough for me. I have no interest in being Miss Big Corporate America. taking time at home with my daughter and learning to undo a lot of maybe some of the things in my own childhood that were not ideal. I read, I researched, I volunteered. I did so many things. And I knew when our daughter was getting ready for college that my husband and I, we could have either spent the rest of our years living what appeared to be a profitable, nice life in suburbia, very comfortable with a computer firm that we had developed, or we could live a purposeful life. And for me, I could remember when I graduated from high school, I was chosen to give the graduation speech, and mine was From Dreams to Reality. And what I wanted to do was somehow find a way to take those early childhood dreams of traveling the world, making new friends, writing and being an idea person. I was totally taken up with leadership and greatness of the human condition, that it wasn't until I was in my 50s that there was nothing holding me back. And I also wanted to be a good example for my daughter. And I thought, there's nothing holding me back. We sold our big house. We moved someplace smaller. We wanted to live a life of purpose. And fortunately, I married a guy who would say, Maura, you go for it. Wherever you want to go, you go do it, and I'll help make it happen. So for me, yes, for many decades and many years, I did everything. I brought up the child. I cleaned house. I had 2 gigantic dogs. Every time neighbors would find me, I was busy cleaning. I had exchange students living in the house. I did everything regular people and irregular people do. So now I take all of that, all of those life experiences, and when I go and I'm speaking at a university here or overseas or at a leadership gathering somewhere, I come in with all of that, Mark. And you know something? The good, the bad, the ugly, the challenges, the trials, the triumphs, every single thing I bring in makes me, as a speaker, more credible in terms of what I'm doing and how I'm inspiring other people to be true to themselves and to use every experience they're in to rise up and be their better self, which is all I ever wanted to do.
So you're flying around all these countries all over the world, 60, I think you mentioned. I'm sure there's more. Yeah. And you are teaching people about empowerment, how to get happy, just the path, right?
Yes. And you know, it's interesting. You say teaching, you know what I'd prefer to say? I ask questions and I tell stories and I invite people to make connections with what they already know to be true within them, and yet may have, because of all these shiny articles or all these things they've been presented with in the world or all of these other ideas that are external to them, that they could actually go back and think, what resonates with me? What sounds like who and what I am? And even from that point, you've already made progress. You've made progress toward happiness, toward connecting with who you really are, toward following some of the things you like. And what if we could even get 10% more of who we really are out in life? We're usually the better for it. And the world is better for it too.
Oh, that's great. That's great. You know, I really don't follow the news that much just because there's so much negativity in all directions, right? Mm-hmm. And I choose to go more towards the light. And the light is really, to me, about what are those positive things involved in some charity elements, that the whole thing about contribution, right? I mean, it just makes you feel great. Surrounding yourself with positive people and also doing the steps necessary to get you in that place to understand. Part of this is getting a lot of the junk out of your brain, right? And so many times there's those voices in your head of fear and anxiety and you can't do it, and they cloud the picture. And I think everybody does this differently, but really trying to understand getting quiet in your own way of what those things are that you need to do to get you to that point that you're talking about, right? Of life of purpose and happiness and joy.
Absolutely. And we all have our ways of doing it. And there's no one perfect way, but we can all go find that place and find that space.
Yeah. I mean, again, I've said this a couple of times now. The name of this pod is Finding Your Summit, and it's really finding my summit, right? And I didn't know this at the time when I actually flew to Africa to climb Kilimanjaro, but there's so much clarity that came out of that. One of the things is because you can't use your cell phone and you're locked out from any kind of electronical emails and all those things because you're so remote. And so that takes a couple of days to go through that entry and then the reentry of, you know, when you actually come out of it, right? But there is nothing more valuable to me than just not having those things. And so the next tool I had was my journal. So I ended up there's all this downtime between the days that you're climbing, you're intense. And so you just start journaling, and just all of a sudden these things start coming to you because it's not all this other junk that's coming into your life.
Do you know, do you realize we're saying the same thing because there's so much static out there, so many things vying for our attention, so many institutions and ideas that are putting themselves on top of us. And we can oftentimes buy into them as if that's who we are or that's what we believe in. But that quiet space, the quiet places, those are the places we actually get to hear our own soul. And when we can connect with it, we end up so much more clear, so much more at peace. And we really can move forward in directions that feel right for us, and we could reintegrate with ourselves.
What is going on for you down in Uganda?
Oh, it's funny. I only took one trip down to Uganda. I have two stories. The first was about 9 years ago. I had actually heard about this pastor who was a former engineer, and he was raising the dead. And I thought, oh my gosh, I have got to go down. Or actually, I think I wanted to send my husband. He said, Maura, if you want to go, you're the one going. And just when you were talking about going up to Mount Kilimanjaro and that whole process of getting rid of cell phones, my going to several islands in Uganda on Lake Victoria, they were so far away from society that the people on these islands never went into the water, never heard of a continent of Europe, let alone America, didn't even know what a car was. It was like such a shocking thing, but I had one of the best times in my life connecting with these people. You're probably asking what I'm doing with Empowered Voices.
Yep.
Empowered Voices, I sit on the board of an organization, nonprofit, that my daughter and a fellow student from hers, they were both studying at Harvard as graduate students, actually did as a result of a class on international relations. So they went down to Uganda. They set up this nonprofit for women who, there's so many issues down there, Mark, but these were moms that not only were watching their own kids, but they were caring for so many other kids because they had such a terrible AIDS crisis. The day was involved with just getting enough water to keep everybody alive. And this is a process of helping these women help themselves to become financially, economically, and socially stable. And so,
so tell me how you did that, though.
I didn't do it. My daughter did that, and I am on the board.
I see. So you got to go along and actually witness this, and that's great. What a great experience.
And you know what? I'm glad you even bring that up in terms of what is it that we want to do. And you said you go toward the light. Mm-hmm. With the volunteering that I do, with the things I get involved in, I'm always looking for this. What is it that I could do that could unite us and bring us together rather than divide us? What is there great in the human psyche and the human experience that makes everyone feel more uplifted? And it's not too different from you. We're looking for those things that lift us up rather than pull us down. And if each one of us were to just be able to take 5 or 10% of our time, our talents, our resources, we would be able to convert this world from the one we've all been experiencing into one that's so much better.
Yeah. So I had the good fortune of being invited with this group, Waterboys Skritzlong, who is in the NFL. And we went down to Tanzania and went out into the Serengeti desert, and we raised a bunch of money to build water wells for the people of the Maasai tribe, which we did. And so there was 6 NFL players, some Green Berets, Jim Moore, head coach at UCLA, and we all flew down. And it was amazing to me because, at first you feel great about raising all this money and what you're going to do to help these different people. And then you go into these villages and you actually see firsthand what you're doing. And the gifts back to us were, 10 times their joy, their happiness over having nothing. And so often, these people get caught up, or many people get caught up. I get caught up and like, oh, I wish I was over here or doing this or that. And their houses are made of sticks. They're on dirt floors. Their currency is a goat, right? They literally, women have to walk, mostly it's women, with these 5-gallon looking buckets on their head, miles to go get water to bring it back. The guys are out there with their stick, their spear, guarding the herd so lions don't come and eat their currency, right? And yet, when we were to come in, the amount of things that they had handcrafted for us and given us back, again, the money aside, just the joy and the value of actually seeing that. I wish everybody could just be transformed into that society and just have a look at what life should be about.
I totally agree. In fact, even as you're telling me this, it was reminding me of one medical missions trip I went on and lost all of my luggage along the way, which was another experience. But we were bringing medical relief to coffee growers in the hills of Honduras. These people, right, they all live in stick shacks. They make $500 a year. I remember trying to give them toothbrushes, and one guy laughed at me. He said, I only have one tooth left. I don't need the toothbrush. And I speak Spanish. These people were so happy, so full of joy. And each time we can go into someone else's environment, sometimes it could be literally in the same city we live in, if we're mindful of what's going on, or literally around the world, we can find ways to connect. We can find one another's joy, and we can really become the better for it from our insides out, from our soul. It's not always about the American way. Not to say there's anything wrong with it, but there's so many other ways to have a full, meaningful life.
So I think you may have just said this, but I want to, in this way. So when you go to these different conferences, right, and you're speaking and now presentation is 30, 45 minutes, right? How do you end? Right? I mean, when you're up there, kind of like, okay, we've talked about this journey of trying to be stuck to unstuck, and now we need to go towards contribution and happiness and light and joy, and stay away from sorrow and anxiety and doubt. Right? Do you have like a parting thought to everybody? Like, if there's nothing else you've heard, I want you to remember this.
Oh, do you know thank you. I do a couple of things. One of the things I'll always ask them is, I said, I want to give you at the beginning of this talk, on a scale of 1 to 10, what does your energy feel like and what does your hope feel like? And it's always an invitation. It's not that I want to tell them anything. It's I want to point them back to the light of who they are and what they are within. And at the end of going through various stories, asking questions, showing different paradigms that they can sort of relate to, I'll ask them the same questions. Now I want you to give yourself the same measurement scales and tell me where you stand in terms of levity or hope and happiness. And I'll always say to them, just if you could take one new thing back, one new thing that registers with you and says, I knew that already. It just lit my light up brighter. And I will tell you that happens all the time, because people internally, intrinsically, really do know who they are, what they want, and what's important to them. And unless they're given that opportunity, that space to start looking at it, they may not even know it exists. And so it's the beginning of a process for some. And then, of course, I'll invite them to go listen to my podcast, which invites them to really go within and start learning how to journal, start asking themselves reflective questions, start taking those little action steps to connect between what's real for them and then how they're going to exhibit that in their natural life. And it's very empowering.
No, that's great. That's great. I always tell everybody that many people, just because of my athletic background, they've come to me and said, hey, Mark, how do you lose weight? How do I get in better shape? Nutrition, fitness, all that stuff. And what I've seen over time, after time, after time, if it doesn't come within, it ain't happening, right? So you got to be in that space. You got to be willing to want to step out and go across that threshold and say, you know what, I need help, or I want to have a better life, or I want to get more happy, or what. I mean, so you got to, that action needs to create that reaction coming around, right?
Yes. And something, what you just did, you just came full circle with that first question you asked me about my mantra, living happy from the inside out. Unless we make a decision on the inside that either I'm not happy, or this is not real for me, or I'm doing something that goes against my better judgment, my ethics, whatever, my true identity, unless we make that decision and own it within, or how about this one? How about owning up to poor behavior, or owning up to a life story you've always told yourself and saying, you know what? I don't want to live here anymore. It's time to change. It's time to change the way I think. It's time to take that responsibility. Unless we're willing to make that decision, and sometimes making it over and over and over again until it sticks, you're right, we're going nowhere. We're going nowhere. That's why I don't call myself a motivator, but I will call myself an inspirer. Because what an inspirer will do is to take the candle of illumination in their world and use it to better illuminate the candle of illumination in someone else's inner world. And once someone can see brighter from within, everything in their mind starts to shift.
It's absolutely beautiful. I love that. Love that. So where can people find you on your podcast? Because we talked about this before we went on air here, and my podcasts are 30 to 45 minutes. And it sounds like yours are more like 10-minute daily positive bits that somebody can ingest, take it in, and go on throughout their day, right?
Yes, exactly. It's almost ironic for somebody like me who's always talking that my podcasts are among the shortest. They are 10 minutes. They start with a reflective question. Most people, don't realize they never even ask themselves what they think about anything. Then it goes into an anecdotal story. And the reason why stories are important is because people will inject their lives into the stories, and that shifts them from one reality to another. Then there's a quick call to action so that they can start making those connections. And the last thing I do is invite someone to come in and to share with the audience what their notion of living happy from the inside out is. So they could find me on, it's Maura Sweeney, Living Happy Inside Out, on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and then I know I'm syndicated in various places. And they could also find me on my website, maura4u.com.
Yeah, the number 4.
Yeah, and the letter U, because I'm always for you.
Okay, we are for sure going to have these in the show notes afterwards, so no worries there. So if people want to find you and listen to your podcast, they can do that. And I got to tell you, I've done a number of these podcasts now, and I always get charged when I'm talking to somebody that's full of positivity. And most all the people that I talk to, it's all about overcoming different things. And for you, it was really a career choice and feeling. And I think we've all been there. And that's why so many people can relate to your story, right? And now you're just in this place of spreading the happiness, world and being joyful, right? And that's what we all want to be. And that's where I'm still trying to go, right? It's fun. It's great. And it's fun to talk to people like you.
Thank you. And you appreciate your having me on, because your space is the space I like to dwell in. None of our lives are going to be pristine and perfect, at least yet. But we can take wherever we are, wherever we've been, to say, all right, what am I going to do to make this better? And we can.
Yeah, we're doing it.
We are. So thanks so much, Mark. This has really been great. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Hey, this is Mark, and thank you so much for tuning in to the podcast this week. We had another great guest, and it is so awesome to continually have these different people on, talk about their different adversity, how they've overcome that, and what they've done to affect change in their life to become very successful. So, really appreciate you guys tuning in. So, as always, we love the rating and reviews that you guys do on iTunes. If you haven't done that, please go do that. It really helps us in terms of increasing our visibility within Apple iTunes. And anyways, it's just fun to share the love and what these different stories, these different people are all about. So make sure you tune in next week. We appreciate it. And that's it. Bye.